You are entering an investing state of mind the system doesn't want you in. The truth. You want answers? Michael Covel has them on the trend-following radio network. And now, reaching over 130 countries and territories, Michael Covel.
My guest today is Ed Seykota. Ed is affectionately titled by me a living legend. And even if no one else knew who Ed was, I would call him that. Not from any kind of a hero worship standpoint or anything like that. But early on in my career, Ed influenced me. He got me thinking clearly. If you ever see me picking apart arguments, starting debates, and perhaps you fixate on the emotional component of the debate, and you don't look at the facts and you don't look at the logic, that's what I learned from Ed. Put aside the emotion. Let people get all hot and bothered. Let them get all worked up. And then calmly, coolly break everything into its component parts and try and move things along a process that gets to a good answer. Maybe there's not a perfect answer, but let's move things along to a good answer. Let's think clearly about our words and our actions. I'm forever grateful that Ed Seykota influenced me in that fashion. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I was trying to think of an example just as we were getting on the call here, and I was thinking, and I'm not trying to pick on a particular bank or anything necessarily, but a few years ago, I read something that JP Morgan had made money every day in the first quarter of the year. And I was thinking, wow, is that a great example of the Gavopoly system in action? Would be one question to you. The second part of that question, though, would be, is that if there doesn't seem to be much outrage right now, and I'm wondering if the outrage, the lack of outrage, is reflected in the fact that so many average everyday people via mutual funds and perhaps pensions actually have investments in these many Gavopoly type companies. It just seems like it's a precarious situation.
Yeah, I don't want to comment on any particular banks, and I'm not sure exactly in what section you're talking about. But it's everywhere you look, everywhere there's a regulation, there's a Gavopoly system at work, and the outrage, as you say, the outrage doesn't really occur because as the system grows, more and more people have an investment in it, and as you stop competition within a economy, the whole economy itself becomes less competitive. And we're certainly seeing that show up in our relationships with other countries, where particularly China and other countries, India and so forth, we're not competitive. The whole economy, our economy is not competitive because we don't allow ourselves to compete with one another anymore. And so we're not competitive with other countries.
I think to add to that point on the other countries, I see it being in Asia right now. It seems like that in Asia, you can build an 80-story office tower faster than sometimes perhaps you can install a fence in America.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Trying to do anything in the United States requires enormous amount of regulatory effort, and the companies have to maintain whole staffs just to comply with regulations, and all of that has got to get paid for somewhere. So they've got to eventually get to raise prices, and we're not competitive. So it's and I'm not saying any of this is bad or wrong or should be changed. In my book, I don't say that there's anything wrong. I'm just looking at how does the engine work. How does this work, and how do we explain what we've got? And I'm not trying to change anything. I'm just saying, well, this is how it works, and I need to know how it works because, as your audience does, and so do I, we try to trade, and we want to understand as best we can what's going on. So my point is not to change anything. I'm not a politician, and I'm not running for office or anything. I'm not promising any changes, or I don't have any formula for change. I'm saying this is what's happening, and you might as well take this into your personal calculus when you're playing the markets.
Well, you make a great point because you're talking to a guy that unfortunately grew up in the Washington D.C. area, so I had to listen to too much politics. And I think there's a great video on the internet with Ray Dalio talking about the economic machine. And I think you're doing something similar, but it's your take, your research, and you're saying, hey, look, this is the machine that I see. This is the economy as I see it. And I'm not trying to give you a value judgment on it, but by all known facts and my research, the evidence lays out, this is what's happening.
Yeah, and Dalio has a wonderful video out there, and he's talking about how the economy works. Basically, his analysis, the supposition he has, we have a free economy, and those kinds of things work in a free economy. But since 1913, when we had the Fed, you'll see the free economy isn't really free to function anymore. And if you look at long-term charts up till 1913, before 1913, when we had the Fed, we had a fairly stable economy. We had blips, ups and downs, and so forth. But since the Fed's come along, it's enabled the Govopoly system to put an effective tax rate on citizens and spend money in excess of what they can tax. There used to be a limit to government growth in the Govopoly system. That limit was that they would have to tax people in order to fund the government. But they don't have to do that anymore. They can go to the Fed and they can get however the mechanism works, however you want to explain the mechanism. You can say they can print up money or get a line of credit or whatever. Basically, they can spend money before they tax. I've shown in my model, if you keep government spending to under about 1.5% effective asset tax, so under 1.5%, government never can grow big enough to stop the growth of the free competition sector. But once you get an effective tax rate above that, then the government will grow, and it's a parasite. It's the same mathematics of a parasite, where the parasite will grow and then finally it will take over the host, or like a cancer or a parasite. The mathematics and the dynamics are the same. It stays in balance if you keep the asset tax rate under about 1.5%, but we're way over that now, and we are seeing a decline in manufacturing and in tool making, and we're consuming, or the Govopoly system is now consuming the free competition sector. And when we run out of a free competition sector, which is imminent in my opinion, then we have a whole different economy where you have the Govopoly system trying to manage the free competition sector, and it can't do that. It doesn't know how to do that. It's not set up to do that. It's set up to take and exploit. It's not set up to create and innovate. And so we're headed towards an economy in which we have basically a controlled economy, less freedom. I'm not suggesting this is going to change. I'm suggesting you've got to start admitting that's what's happening, and you got to cope with it. You have to cope with it in your decision making, and there are ways to cope with it. Wishing it'll come back and thinking you can vote for somebody that's going to turn it around, I think, is wishful thinking. Let
me take a step back, Ed. I want to kind of take a step back for a second, let you talk a little bit about some historical perspectives, your own in particular. And one of the things that I've always loved about you, and we're going to get back on the Govopoly conversation and kind of take it to its natural ending and some of the solutions that you see, since if we're being faced with this Govopoly situation, you do see some clear solutions, or at least some directions that people can go. There's no perfection for sure, but I think one of the things
I don't think there's a solution for the economy. I don't think there's a problem. This is just what it does. I think there are some things that people can do as individuals to cope with it as it evolves and changes, but I'm certainly not suggesting a change in in the economy. I think this is just what it does. There's nothing to fix. This is what it does. Just like people, they get born, they grow, they mature, and then they die. That's the way it happens. And so you just have to learn to cope with things.
Well, you just made my point for where I wanted to go, which is, and correcting me on language. One of the things that I've always learned from you and admired from you is the clear thinking. And I always, when I try to respond to people, if I'm doing an interview or something in an online forum, I try to stay clear. I try to be as objective as I can. You are exceptionally good at this. And especially when people look at your writings, they can see it's very, very clear. How did you start to have this type of clear thinking as an individual? Or was this something that you felt always as a young man and it's been with you your whole life? How did you develop this way to look at the world clearly?
Well, thank you. It's a struggle for me. I'm thinking about it a lot, and I always think, wow, I could have said that. I could have said that better. I'll probably hear this interview and I'll say, oh man, that's pretty lame. I do a lot of writing and rewriting, and I've always done that. And I try to think about something until it gets simple. And if it's complicated, I figure, well, I don't understand it yet. So one of the things I do is I just think about things till they get simple. And then they're easy to explain, and then they're pretty clear. And I've had some mentors in my life that have been sticklers. Jay Forrester, for one, absolutely unforgiving about any misuse of English or any equations. They ought to be annotated, and the units of measure had to match, and you just couldn't get away with anything. And so I developed that. I just developed that habit. I've developed this to such an extent that I have a language that goes with it, SVOP, which subject, verb, object, keep it in the present tense. That's a way that helps sort it out. If I find myself straying from that grammatical convention, I figure I don't understand something. Anything that's clear fits into that linguistic format. So I'm on this, and I enjoy it. It's just I probably take it to extreme. It's not. it's not a good strategy socially. Socially, people are very metaphoric, and they're very inaccurate, and they just say what they feel, and you've got to decipher their feelings and so forth. So I don't recommend this as a social method, but as far as thinking and trying to get logical answers, it's pretty good.
I was wondering maybe if you would go a little bit further on Jay Forrester. And for those that don't know, very well-known MIT professor, systems dynamics. And I think Jay is still with us. He's like 96, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
And prior to publishing my book, I went and visited with him, and I included him, some things on him in the book. Amazing person. He, at one point, held a patent on the core memory for computers, enabling some of the first of the world with a computer. He was behind that. He was inventor of the radar positioning system, which was a servo control mechanism. And then he went on and applied servo control thinking to business situations and developed a modeling language, invented the whole field of system dynamics. To really understand how systems work, I think requires a lot of training. I think it's imperative to have some kind of an engineering background, preferably electrical engineering, preferably servo dynamics, to understand how systems work. So there's a whole field, and he pioneered it, and he's just this is an amazing guy.
I was actually, I'm working on a project right now, and I was reading a couple of his white papers recently, and it's, I can see how he influenced you on the clear thinking, because his white papers are just crystal clear. It's fun to read them because it's just there's no beating around the bush. It's all just direct. And it's understandable too. It's not, an academic treatise. It's something that you can sit down and start to digest.
He would go to conferences on economics, and there would be a panel, and then they would have comments, and he would point out that a certain speaker in his speech had contradicted himself several times. And he would listen. He would really listen to what people say, and he would think about it. And then if it wasn't accurate, he wasn't shy about saying so.
No, like I said, I think for the audience out there not familiar, checking out your Trading Tribe website at edseykota.com, they could definitely get an understanding of, if they're not familiar with what you and I are talking about right now, they will definitely start to understand how you handle your FAQs, your frequently asked questions. But that's a completely different subject. Let me
go ahead. On the topic of getting things exactly right, I want to point out that's Seykota.com, not edseykota.com, SEYKOTA.com. Ed Seykota goes somewhere else. And so do I, but the website is Seykota.com.
Ed, let me get back into the notion of Gavopoly for a second. So we've got this system that's operating, and as you kind of say, it's doing as it should. You are observing and you're describing it, but it's not a pretty conclusion to when the 39th day and the duckweed races across the pond. It's not a pretty conclusion, but I think what's tough when you look at the media and the political systems, everybody has a fix. If you vote for me, I can fix it. I've got this platform. The media says if we do this, we can fix it. If we watch this TV show, if we get upset about this issue, and I'm just as guilty as some people to get upset about things, but it's all seems to be one big dog and pony show. But if we get back to your modeling of the Gavopoly system, the dog and pony show just distracts us, but the system marches on.
Well, the dog and pony show is part of the system. The dog and pony show is purposefully orchestrated to distract people from the real issues. Nobody talks about the real engine behind this is the growth of the Gavopoly system and the fact that it has unlimited access to money. In my model, I've even tried to, even if you eliminate borrowing for the government and you reduce regulations, at this point it would take 20 or 30 years of austerity to get any meaningful change, to get us back to a free competition society. You're not going to get anybody elected on a 30-year austerity program in which the government decides that they're not going to borrow money anymore. And that's just not going to happen. So nobody's even talking about this, or nobody's even interested in it. The real issue about how the economy works and how debt works and how deficit spending works and bailouts and all the rest of that, those are just kind of accepted, and no one is concerned about it. What they're concerned about is there's a race riot, or there's police, or someone thinks the police are being too brutal, or one race group is beating up on another race group, or there's people coming across the border or not coming across the border. So we're talking about fixing things that are all symptoms, but nobody. There's a couple politicians. I don't care to name any of them, but there's a couple of them that try to talk about the real issues. They always get marginalized, and they don't even make the final cut in the political race. And what you have is the distinction between political parties is fairly obscure at this point. They're all voting for expansion of the Gavopoly system. They want to make this. The system is now in its final phases where it's taking over. There's no way to resist it. There's no way to stop it. I don't recommend spending a lot of time worrying about it. It's like a patient, or if you had a friend that was dying of terminal cancer, well, what do? You try to make the best of the time you have, but you don't spend a lot of time trying to fix it. There's nothing to fix. Or someone is just dying. There's nothing to fix. We're making a transition, or a caterpillar turns into a butterfly, and is a change in form. There's nothing to fix. It's how it works. You don't have to use death metaphors. It's a transformation metaphor. The economy is transforming from what used to be a free competition, innovative society. It's now transforming into a very controlled society. This is a transition. It's natural. It happens time and time again to all societies. There's a cycle. It goes back and forth, and there's the Gavopoly system grows until it finally renders the host society inoperable, and then it collapses, and then it starts over again. This is a long-term cycle. You don't find any currencies around that are more than a couple hundred years old. And if you had invested a penny, one penny at the birth of Christ at year zero, or whatever year you want to make the difference between BC and AD back then, that one penny growing at nominal interest rates of a couple percent would be more than all the money in the world. So you say, well, how can that be? Because there certainly was a penny, and there certainly was ways to invest, and how come nobody has done that? Well, because you earn a lot of money, and then you get these periodic resets in the money. So nobody's able to accumulate money for very long, because the money eventually goes worthless. And that's also part of the design. And you have hard money for a while. You have gold or sticks or some other tokens of exchange, cattle or whatever you have. And then you go off into currency, and then you get bankers decide they can loan out money, because not everybody's going to come and get the money at the same time. And then you get fractional reserve banking, and then you get a federal or a central bank, and then you get excesses, and you get huge bubbles, like having bubbles much more frequent and much larger bubbles now, and eventually the bubbles are just going to dominate, and every bubble becomes more severe than the last one.
And I think for some people listening, I could see some in the audience already building up a criticism in their mind, and I think what people need to understand is that you're not. Some people might be thinking, oh, Ed Seykota, he sounds bearish, or he sounds like a doom and gloomer. Whereas you are taking a very distinct perspective to where, like, look, I'm observing the system as it is. You're very clear about it. You're saying, you can't really worry about it. You can't stop it. And I think, and you're not trying to make a prediction of the timing of something. You're just objectively trying to analyze the economy that we all are in the middle of.
Yeah, I'm not saying anything wrong with it. I think this is the way it works. And that's basically what we do in the trading tribe, is we look at, how can we be more effective as people in coping with the environment? If you'd been around 100 years ago, or maybe back in the early 1800s, a whole different economy. You want to get out there and build machines, start factories, and hire people and participate in the greatest economic miracle ever. These days it's different. It's a different, and there certainly are pockets of innovation. There are very bright people coming up with whole new industries, and you got drones flying around that we didn't have before, and lots of advances. So there certainly are people innovating. But by and large, a lot of people are out of work, and you have a huge dependent class, and you have a huge amount of moral hazard in the economic system, and you have a disconnect between our governance and people. People don't even believe what the politicians are telling them anymore. So you have a whole different economy and a whole different society, and it's just part of the evolution. And you can find all kinds of books about what we ought to do to fix things. I don't think there's anything to fix. I think it's just how it works. And there's always people that think we should fix things. It's one of the symptoms of this transition we're going through, is there's people that want to, go out there in the fall and pick up the leaves and glue them back on the trees because they liked it better in the spring when the leaves were green and on the trees. But you can't glue the leaves back on the trees. You just have to accept the fall for the beauty that's there and move with it. So that's what we do in the trading tribe, is we try to, what can we do with our own attitudes and our own responses to cope with whatever the flow is, not try to change things, pretend they're different. What can we do to to go with the flow. In other words, to use trend following in our own personal lives.
I know you look at trend following from not only from a trading perspective, but your own life perspective.
Yeah, and I think if you're going to really be a trend follower, you're going to have a lot of trouble limiting it to one area, because you know, let's say you have a trend following system. You say, well, okay, I'm gonna have a diversified portfolio, a trend following portfolio. So I'm going to free myself up from emotions. Emotions have always been the big problem here. So I'm going to have a diversified trend following portfolio, or I'm going to invest in somebody else's portfolio, and that's going to fix this emotional problem. And then what happens? Well, their investment or their portfolio goes up and down. And then I get emotional problems with that. So you don't really fix your emotions by having a system. What you do is you just move them upstream. You move them upstream instead of you have constituents within the portfolio that used to bother you, and they went up and down. And then now you have a portfolio that goes up and down. You just move the problem upstream. So ultimately you have to say, well, what is it that I'm feeling, and what do I do when I feel these things, and can I come up with better and more useful or productive ways of responding when the thing goes up and down? And eventually you've got to come to terms with that. And so the best trend followers, I think, are the ones that have made peace with themselves and have said, well, this is what I do in the case of things going up and down, the value increasing and decreasing. This is how I behave, and this is how I act. And of course, as you know, there are all kinds of things you can do when things go up. Some people, when something goes up, they sell them. Some people, when things go up, they buy. And when they keep going up, some people sell more and some people buy more. And if you go to extreme in either of those cases, you're counterproductive, self-destructive. You've got to know how to do that, and you've got to do it consistently. You've got to do it in your personal life. I think if you do these things in your personal life as well, it supports a trend following. Because if you're not in alignment between your overall philosophy and how you behave as a person, and you try to do trend following, well, there's going to be conflicts. And so we in Trading Tribe, we hardly ever talk about actual trading or what the markets are doing. What we're working with is the emotional reaction to volatility, or emotional reaction to loss, or to structure or authority, or all these other issues. People straighten these things out. Their relationships with their significant others and their children get better. They report more satisfaction in all areas of life. And, incidentally, their trading is getting better. And they don't quite know how that happened. But it's just that they've turned into a person that now can cope with uncertainty and can cope with volatility, and they couldn't do it before. And you can't, in my opinion, you can't take a system and use that to medicate your feelings. You've got to get your feelings. And some people say, well, I'm just going to suppress my feelings, stiff upper lip approach, or grin and bear it, or clench your teeth and hope for the best. I tend to go the other way. You try to say, what's the positive intention of these feelings? Celebrate them, find out the positive intention, and as soon as you do that, the feeling disappears and you go on to the next feeling. So I'm more of the go with the flow on the feelings as well. So there's a lot of different approaches. But by now, after we've been doing this a couple decades, we're developing a body of knowledge of how to do this, and to what extent can we actually reprogram response patterns. We're getting pretty good at this. As we've got, and you can follow what we're doing. I put it all on the blog at Trading Tribe, at tradingtribe.com. All this is free if people want to go on there and look at it. And we're documenting the growth of all kinds of people who are using this technology, and it seems to be, to the extent they use it, it seems to be working pretty well for them.
It always just seems like to me that the place that one is trying to find is just some peace and contentment. And there's this just, again, I start off with giving you the praise of the clear thinking. I think that's to just be able to sit in a room and not feel you're not to have this anxiety and worrying constantly. And if one has that, to work on that. And I think it's just trying to find it. I see a lot of parallels to your work and some of the meditation. I read some of the Zen scholars like Alan Watts. It seems like there's some commonalities with some of your work and the Eastern thought process.
I believe every feeling has a positive intention. For instance, if you're in a house and you smell smoke, you hear crackling sounds and notice the temperature going up in the room, and you conclude that maybe the house is on fire, that would be a really good time to feel anxiety and to take some action in response to it. So I'm not so sure that you want to, medicate your mind, anesthetize yourself and put yourself into some meditative state where you don't respond. That's not really what I'm saying. I think you want to notice the feeling you're having in the moment and act appropriately. And you want to learn the difference between medicating a feeling and responding to it proactively. So it's not always, I'm not suggesting you always aim towards peacefulness. Sometimes you want to get busy. You might want to get busy and put a trade on, or you might want to get busy and take some corrective action, some risk control, or you might want to take some action and get into some opportunity. But whatever it is, I think you can learn to come into harmony with your feelings. And to some extent, it's nice to just be able to be peaceful and watch your feelings and watch your mind and rest. It's important to rest particularly when you feel tired. But I don't recommend using either trading tribe technology, which I call TTP, trading tribe process, using that or anything else for medicinal purposes, like a drug or alcohol or a sedative. You have to watch out. There's a difference between using any of these technologies as a sedative, and I don't think any of the Zen masters really recommend blissing out and staying there permanently. I think they want to be responsive and proactive to whatever feeling arises in the moment.
I love the constant learning. What's the better way to handle expressing oneself? What's the better way there's always a better way to do it, right?
Well, I think so. I think I try, we're here in the moment and I'm learning something, from you, and I'm trying to be responsive, and I'll think about this later and I'll say, oh man, now I really could have said that better. But that's how life is. I do the best I can in the moment, and then go back and maybe do it differently next time, and try to learn and study my responses and say, well, can I change the response? And then that's what we do in a trading tribe. We try to look at what our responses are to our feelings, and then we practice identifying, well, what is it we are doing? How are we getting the result we're getting? And can we change our response patterns and get different results next time around?
The only way you can learn is to extend yourself to perhaps in front of somebody that has more experience. And once you extend yourself, there's the chance that you might be forced to learn something that makes you feel like, wow, why did I just say it that way? I could have said it the way he just told me. But you want to get to the point of knowing the better way until you extend yourself with the wrong way.
Yeah, we find in the right environment, and we're take a lot of care to set up the environment correctly. Once you set up an environment in which the goal is for people to help each other improve, I think this is true in the trading tribe, and some companies have this down pretty well too, some other organizations, where when personal growth becomes important, then when people correct you or offer advice, you say, thank you. Thank you for helping me learn something. In a lot of situations, somebody will correct you or give you advice, and then you get upset about it, and you may say something to protect yourself, or put them down, or swear at them, or tell them to keep their distance, or whatever. So it's a different environment where everyone is trying to grow and do a better job. And that's another thing we had. When you have an expansive economy and a company that's growing and everybody's trying to do better, then the culture in that company, when you have growth, when you have a free competition society and free competition, you have a competitive startup firm, and somebody says to somebody else, there's a better way to do this, then they say, thank you for telling me. And they start doing it that way. When you get a survival company, one that's overly restrictive and political, and there's regulations, you better mind your own business and don't go talking to somebody else about what they should be doing. You see the whole environment, the whole structure. The environment in one case is pro personal growth and pro learning, and the other one is not. It's very territorial and very defensive. You can walk into companies, you can sense this right away. Some are open to grow, and then they get mature, and then if they start getting kind of the Gavopoly model, and they start going the other way, and they don't want to have, you offer advice at your own risk.
Ed, one of the things that you do in the Gavopoly book and your premise is you talk about the strategy of trend following, and I don't want to phrase it as a solution, but you offer trend following as a way to perhaps, a better phrasing is to cope with as we move towards this Gavopoly system that you see as inevitable. And trend following is, and perhaps there's other solutions, and I'd love to hear if you think there are, but as you talk about trend following as one kind of a way to cope, I would love for you to go back in time a little bit, if you will, and because you've had an interesting career, you've had some interesting mentors, interesting students, but I know, and I mentioned this in my email, there's a couple traders in your early years that I think had a really strong influence on you. And I would love for you to share a little bit of wisdom or perhaps experience or thoughts or memories about two gentlemen in particular, if you wouldn't mind. And that'd be Amos Hofstadter and Richard Donchian. And Amos Hofstadter, he was at Commodities Corporation, and Richard Donchian at Hayden Stone, just two very accomplished early pioneers in the field of trend following. Would you share some wisdom?
I'll be glad to share what I know. I knew Donchian a lot better than Hofstadter. And Donchian had noticed this system. He noticed the 2-week rule in copper. 2-week rule, meaning you buy something when it makes highs for 2 weeks and you sell it when it makes lows for 2 weeks. And he just noticed this somehow, and he didn't remember exactly how he noticed it. I asked him once, how'd you come up with a 2-week rule? And he said, I don't exactly know, and you're the first person that's ever asked. He said he just kind of came up with it, as far as I can remember. And that was the start of the start of automated trend following was when he came up to the 2-week rule. And before that, you can look at some of Livermore's writings, and he had a system of pivot points and so forth. And there's other people that have talked about it. He basically started the 2-week rule. Now that won't work today. Back then you had a little different character of the markets. And the 2-week rule used to work in copper. And then we found that you had to lengthen those, and maybe you make the weeks longer, 6 weeks, or sometimes now they've got 30 or 40, 50 weeks, or much more than that. He had this system, and then he had a couple followers there in his office. He came up with a system. He didn't always follow it himself, but he had this system, and he had people on it, and he had people that were religiously following the system, and they seemed to do pretty well. And I came along, and I studied his rule set. He had Donchian's rules and Donchian's guidelines. And about that time, we had computers were starting to become within reach of people to use them. Although they didn't have personal computers, they did have mainframes at some companies, and I got, if you can believe this, I got to go into the major brokerage house at the time on the weekend, and I had access to their mainframe computers that they used to run the company. And I was in there, and there was a security guard, and there was me, and I had access to the complete computer base of the whole company. And I was just using it to do computer testing.
Were you pinching yourself at that time?
No, I thought it was just normal. I said, well, I want to do this research, and they said, okay. And nobody would, in those days, nobody ever thought about anybody trying to go in there and do anything nefarious. I was just in there doing research. No one would even, in those days, you wouldn't even think about something like that. But these days, you couldn't get anywhere close to the inner workings of a brokerage house. These days, you couldn't do it. But in those days, I did the computer testing on the mainframe computer of the brokerage house, and all of their disks and all of their history and everything. They were just sitting around in this big room. It was a huge room, and all these mainframe computers and these big tape drives and so forth. It was just, now you can get probably all the computational power in that whole room. Probably you got more computational power in your cell phone now. In those days, that was quite the thing. So I would run back tests, and I would do a back test that you could do now in probably a second or two. It would take half hour, 45 minutes to do one set of tests. And I was using punch cards, and it was a different era back then.
Did you find it unusual, or what were your feelings at the time? Because there weren't a huge number of peers that you could bounce ideas off. I mean, you said you knew Dick Donchian, but there wasn't this. I mean, today there's a much wider network, and people are connected on the internet. They can reach out to you at FAQs, but there was no FAQs for you back then.
No, and I took Donchian's work, and he had a letter that he would publish every week. He would publish a letter which would have his rules on it, and it would also have a kind of a model account, and you could follow along. And the idea was you would follow along and you would place your orders with him. I guess that was the way that was supposed to work. So I tested his rules, and I came back and said, well, the rules they're internally are not consistent. The rules you can't program all these rules at the same time because they conflict with each other. So I started taking rule sets that were non-conflicting, and I tried to tune it up and see, well, here's what we can do. And I would try different experiments with the rules, and I would check it with some brokers and traders in the office. And a lot of times I say, well, I'm going to change this. I'm going to make the system less responsive. So the market has to go up more before you start to buy it. So make the time constants longer. And people would say, well, that's going to make it more risky because your stop's going to be further away. And then we would test it, and we would get the exact opposite result. So all these things were very counterintuitive. I did some of the first testing, and you're right, there wasn't any other standard. Now I've got this on my website. If you or your listeners want to go on the website and replicate some of these tests to learn how to do it, I've got it on there, and there's a template, and you can do it on your Excel spreadsheet or whatever. And then enough people have done it, so they all get the same result to the penny. So I'm pretty confident I've got the right answer up there. But in those days, no, there wasn't anybody else. I was just curious, and I said, well, how does this work? And Donchian had set it up as a system. I said, well, okay, I'm going to simulate it. I'll go back in the computer and see if I get the same results that Donchian's getting, and I'll try to set up a diversified portfolio. And we did that, and the company I was with marketed it for a while, and we had a diversified portfolio, and it was all run on computer by a service bureau. I had a service bureau. And we would enter the data every day and then get the result, and then we would put the orders in. But the company couldn't stick to it. The company I was with couldn't stick to it. And they also couldn't resist the temptation of trying to get the customers to trade more often than the system wanted them to trade. The problem with the system was it worked, and it made money for the clients, but the problem was it made far less money for the brokerage house because they were used to day traders, and they were used to people coming in and lasting a few months and then losing their money and moving on and doing something else. And so that's the way the brokerage house set up. People would come in and try to trade, lose their money, and leave. And here was something else. They would come in, and they didn't believe they were going to stay, and they said, well, commissions are like a tenth of what they used to be. They're staying with positions. and this is going to wreck our business model. And so there was all kinds of pressures to get people to trade more often, and then there was all kinds of pressures, like you pointed out in some of your letters to me. There was, they've got fancy names for it now, like disposition effect. But in those days, people just didn't want to hold on to something. It went up a little bit, and they want to take their profit. Went down a little bit, and they wanted to add more and hope it'll go back up. And so you had lots of pressures against following systems in those days. And so I had invented something that no one really wanted. And so then I left and I went out on my own, found clients, and I found that some of the most important things was developing a relationship with the clients, that they really knew what to expect and they knew what was going on. Because if the client was not aligned to it, and if you didn't have emotional rapport and understand the system is more than the mathematics. The system is the mathematics plus the willingness to follow the system. And when you increase your worldview to include the investor himself and his emotional responses to what's going on, when you finally get the system include everything, you can design a system that works. But just going into a computer and tuning up your software and say, well, here's the right set of parameters. Well, great. You've got something that theoretically will work for some theoretical robot that'll follow it. But there aren't a whole lot of robots that got money these days. Maybe someday, but right now you've got human beings with human feelings. And unless you include that into your system design, the thing's going to, the wheels are going to come off the cart around the corner.
Yeah, I think you really sum up so much of your ethos in those last few sentences for those that are paying attention. I'm curious, Ed, too. I want just a couple more questions. I won't keep you. But as you we're talking today about your research into developing this Gavopoly model. You're talking about your early research with trend following models. It seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you've been highly motivated by the puzzle aspect of just figuring things out.
Yeah, I guess I like puzzles. I've got a huge collection of, what you might call barroom puzzles, or these metal detanglement puzzles where you have metal pieces that fit together and you got to figure out how to get them apart and together. I've got a huge collection of those, and I in the morning I do chess puzzles, and I like figuring things out. It's always been something that I enjoy doing. I don't know exactly where that comes from. I think it's been, I've been able to incorporate that in my life in such a way that it's useful. But yeah, I think that the puzzle aspect of what I did in the markets, or what I did with the Gavopoly book, what's driven me is I want to understand how it works. I want to know how it works. Then it works and it makes money. That's great. I mean, it's nice to make money, but I think I wouldn't have done it in the first place. Maybe figured out some other way of making money. But the puzzle was what got me. I said, I got to figure this out. Why does this guy Donchin has got this thing that's mechanical, it's making money? How can that be? How can you get something that's mechanical that can make money for nothing without doing any work? How can that be? And so, I kind of got attracted to looking at it, but I don't think I would have gone into it. I wouldn't have gone into it for just the money. It was the puzzle. It was how does this work? I mean, how does this actually work? Can I build a model and can I understand this? And then when you understand it, then it becomes interesting to explain it to people for a while, or then you put it on the website, or you write a book and you go on and you look for a new puzzle. So
I mean, when you were back in the day though, and you're in those mainframe rooms and you're by yourself and you're struggling. I mean, there's got to be a struggle, of course, to try and figure this all out. I mean, was it just pure excitement at the time, and you're this internal excitement that was driving you to just keep going and going till you got the puzzle solved?
Well, that's a good question. That's one of the best questions I've ever heard. What motivates somebody who's a researcher? What motivates them to go? I You say, well, is it the pleasure or the puzzle, or is it the discomfort and not knowing? I think it's deeper than that. It's just, that's what I do. That's what I do. I do that and I play banjo and I get lost in it. Mm. That's my meditation. I have to do it. If I can't play music, something dies. And same with solving puzzles. That's who I am, and that's what I do. And I don't think of it as there's something that pushes me to do it. That's just who I am, and that's what I have to do.
Yeah. I still feel like I'm in training wheels, but I sometimes feel like my career is the same way. I don't necessarily know why. I'm just driven to do what I do, and I'm not necessarily sure what I even do, but I just do it.
Yeah, I like that, and you're good at it. And you're that's one of the places I think we succeed in the tribe, when we get people to this place you're at, where you find out who you are and what you do, and you just do it, and you express yourself, and you create a value by expressing exactly who you are, not pretending to be somebody else. That's a very high state. Congratulations for being there. It'd be a different world if everybody could get there, and I would hope people would follow in your footsteps. And I've watched your career over many years, and I've seen you keep expanding and getting closer to who you are, and now you're really blooming, and you're really making a big contribution. So, good job.
Well, I tell you though, for those that don't know, I'm not going to tell the exact story, but you influenced me greatly when I met you for the first time in 2001. And I can still remember some of the things that you said to me. And I think for some people, they might have felt threatened. And I don't think I felt threatened. I probably was like, okay, what has he just said to me? Why is he saying it? What's the deeper meaning? So in many ways, as you talk about your love of puzzles, I felt like you were giving me a puzzle. Michael, you might want to consider this. Ba, 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 ba. And so then, of course, I just considered that. And you didn't give specific instructions. You gave some big picture insights. And I think that's probably how you like to be. I think you just want to see if there's more puzzle finders out there.
Yeah. And like, you're open. You wanted to do something. You wanted to go somewhere. You were like on a growth path. And then you viewed, ideas from me and other people. And you've, surrounded yourself with, an amazing group of people who have amazing amount of ability and knowledge and wisdom and resources. You surrounded yourself with one of the most advanced group of mentors I think is possible. You just like to do that. So I think you had an attraction. You attracted people like that, and you enjoyed hearing what they have to say. The people that are on your podcast, people in your life, all are people with strong opinions. All people that make you think and make you grow, and you just have some kind of a affinity for people like that, and that's part of what makes you good at what you do.
Well, if they keep talking to me, I should keep talking to them. That seems like a good rule. If really smart people will agree to talk to me, I should probably talk to them, because then I wouldn't be that smart.
Well, it seems to be working. It seems to be working.
Well, listen, hey, you are, I've kept you for too long. Hopefully, you will get on and have some conversations more regularly. I think I think you could appreciate, I'm sure you feel this, that the flow of our conversation, because we haven't really caught up on the phone for a long time, you can feel the flow improve as the conversation goes on, which is fun. So it takes a while to get into it, and then it takes a while to turn it off again. So it's time to turn it off now. So, hey, listen, Ed, I appreciate you taking the time. Everybody can make it to Seykota.com, SEYKOTA.com, correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you for making me think, and for I enjoy listening to you and talking to you. You always make me think, and I appreciate it. Well, thank you, Ed. You always make me think as well. Appreciate it. Thanks, sir.
My offer to you is really simple, very straightforward, no BS. Go to iTunes, covel.com/iTunes. That's covel.com/iTunes. Takes you to my iTunes page. Simply write a review about this podcast. Let me know what you think. I will then send you a free CD and DVD of Trend Following Extras. I appreciate your support, and believe it or not, this simple little process of going out there and expressing that you enjoy this podcast helps me to get the smartest people on the planet on this show. So again, thank you for all of your help, and thank you for listening.